Excellent, excellent. Well, as I said, we are currently in Enjoying God. If you didn't get a chance to see last week's conversation, make sure you check that out on the app or on our site. You can watch or listen to that. Last week, we began to work through this question. The question is this: what if our greatest delight is found in the good portion? We talked about this idea of our inheritance, the good portion that Mary chooses, our portion, the fact that God steps in our lives. He doesn't promise us wealth. He doesn't promise us health, all these other things. He doesn't promise us that we can escape from grief, but he does promise us our portion, our inheritance is him. And we saw this reality that the Lord is our portion, and he promises, I'll never leave you or forsake you. He is with us. What if our greatest delight is actually found in that, this inheritance that we've been given, this promise that we've been given, and it will never be taken from us? What if our greatest delight, what if our heart's greatest delight is not something that we have to hope for? It's not something that we have to look forward to. It's not something that we have to work for or that we have to achieve, but it's actually available to us. And we talked through this idea that still, for most of you, you don't believe because it's so far from our experience of God. But we talked through this reality that God steps into our life and says, the relationship that I want to have with you is not just that you would follow me, but I want for you to delight in me. Psalm 37 says it this way. It says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. I want for you to delight in me. What if our greatest delight is actually found in him? What if we could actually experience this in him, the one who is always available to us, always with us? And we began this journey saying, okay, if that's true, it changes everything. And if that's true, I want to actually experience that. Now, some of us are still struggling with this because we know how to cry with God. We know how to cry out to God. We know how to work through difficult things with God. We know how to learn from God, but delighting in God is so far from our experience or even what we've been told is possible with God that it's like trying to imagine something you've never seen. And yet God comes and says, this is what I want for you and me. This is the relationship I want to have with you. And so over the course of this series, we're looking at, okay, how do we live that out? How do we actually experience him in that way? Now, for these first 2 weeks, what I want to do is I want to break down the things that keep us from it and look at two of the most significant things that keep us from delighting in him. And then the last 2 weeks, we're going to look specifically at how do we change our engagement of him, where it moves from just being those other things, crying with, crying out to, learning from. How does it move from that to actually being delighting in him? And I think when you look at Scripture, you see people who live this out. You see people who experience this. So David, when he talks about God in a different way. Listen to what it says in Psalm 42. This is David talking about God. He says, as the deer pants for streams of water. And it's this picture of a deer who's thirsty, he's literally screaming out for water, like crying out, like as a deer pants for it. There's this drive, this longing for that water. He says, in the same way, he says, so my soul pants for you, O God. He says, I long for God. I desire God in that way. I think this is someone who had learned. I think David knew how to delight in God. I think it's why he's used to write all these incredible songs about God. Because he knew this. He knew how to live this. He knew how to experience this. And as I said last week, if we don't, my fear is if we don't learn how to experience this, know this, live this, we will move past the inheritance that we've been given. We will not value it the way that it should be valued. We will not experience him the way that we were created to. And so we want to look at, okay, how do we do that? In the first 2 weeks, I'm going to introduce you really to two principles of life. And we see them in Scripture, but they're principles of life. They're things that even in other arenas are taught because it's a reality of the world in which we live. And I'll look at two of them that really oftentimes keep us from experiencing this. The first one shows up in our lives oftentimes as it pertains to joy because of the fact that we live in a culture, and all of us have experienced this, we live in a culture that believes joy is found in abundance. We like a lot. Like we like to have a lot. We like to accumulate a lot. We think joy is found in abundance. And so we're always trying to add more. And part of this is because the joys that we experience, as we mentioned last week, they're shallow delights. So they don't satisfy. They'll be enjoyable for a moment, but they don't last. It doesn't satisfy. Therefore, you need a lot of them. And you need to keep pursuing more and more and more. This is why we chase. We chase all of these things that we enjoy or that bring us joy or that make us happy. And some of them are good and some of them are bad. But it takes us in all sorts of different directions. The most destructive aspect of it is that it causes us to just do more and more and more and chase more and more and more and more and more. And so we get busier and busier and busier and busier and busier and busier and busier as a result of it. And we have this thing inside of us that all of us have experienced called fear of missing out. You may have heard of it as FOMO. So it's not just that we're pursuing the things that we think will bring us joy, but then when we see something that brings someone else joy, well, I want that too. Some of you experienced FOMO even on the way in here today as you checked your social media account. And you're like, how are they on vacation in the last week of September? I should be on vacation in the last week of September. Why am I not on that beach right now? And immediately you start to experience that, well, I've got to have this, I got to have it. And we're chasing and we're adding and we're adding and we're adding and we're adding and we're adding. And we get busier and busier and busier, even though we know, and this again is another one of those principles. Even though we know that in order to enjoy something, you can't hurry through it. We know that busyness destroys our ability to enjoy something. You can have the most amazing steak in the world, but if you're rushing through it because you have somewhere to go or something else to do, you're not going to enjoy it. Some of you are here and you're vegetarians. I don't know what it is for you, but you get the principle. You get the point. We know it, and yet we still keep living life this way, and our lives are getting busier because joy is found in abundance, and I got to have all of this and all of this, all of this, and we just keep adding and adding and adding and adding and adding. And in addition to ignoring the fact that busyness actually causes us to move past what we could or would enjoy, we also have bought into this lie that you can be everything and do everything. We've bought into this lie that you can have it all. Some of you are sitting here thinking, wait, you can't? I'm pretty sure. But we've bought into the lie. You can have it all. You should be able to have it all. It's possible. And you just have to work at it. When in reality, and this is the principle that I really want us to focus in on, in reality, you can't be everything and do everything. And in reality, you can't have it all. And in reality, if you try to engage life in such a way where you think, well, I can have it all, and you keep adding and adding and adding and adding and adding, if you try to be successful at everything you do, you will succeed at almost nothing you try. And this is a basic principle of life. We understand this. If you read anything about leadership, if you read anything about business development, you're going to hear this. You need to figure out what you can do and only you can do and do that. You can't do everything. We understand this as a principle of life, but unfortunately, we don't live life aligned with that principle. And this is one of the most frustrating things about myself, because what we're talking about today is probably the thing that keeps me the most from delighting in God. And I know you can't be everything to everyone. I know you can't have it all. I know you can't succeed at everything, and yet I keep trying. I know that if you try to find joy and abundance and you just keep adding and adding and adding and adding and adding, the busyness is the enemy of the enjoyment. I understand that. And yet I continue to live my life contrary to that. It's like when Paul says, he says, I know the right thing to do and I don't do it. And I know the wrong thing to do and I keep doing it. And I don't think as I introduce this principle that this is something brand new to you. I don't think that this is something you never heard before, but I want for you to see it in a different light. And I specifically want for you to see how Jesus steps into our lives. And I think he demonstrates this to us in an amazing way, in a significantly powerful way. Because, listen, if there's anyone who should have been able to be everything to everyone, it's Jesus. Right? I mean, if God's going to show up in the flesh, he should be the one who actually could do it. If you could have it all, it seems like it should be him who could pull it off. But when you engage Jesus' story, that's not what you find. As a matter of fact, as you engage his story, you find that Jesus isn't everything to everyone. And I remember the first time that I began to work through this in the life of Jesus, it was incredibly freeing to me because I felt like I needed to be, I had to be. Some of you are here and you feel that all the time. You feel like you need to be everything to everyone. You feel like you need to be able to be successful in everything that you do. And if you were someone inside of your family that had to take care of the family, oftentimes you'll carry that even outside of your family into God's family. You think that's what God expects of you. And you're trying to live up to that. I remember experiencing this or reading through this, studying through this with God, and it was incredibly freeing because I saw that wasn't true of Jesus. And as Jesus moved through the story, for the people around him, there's almost no one in Jesus' life that at some point they're not disappointed in him. And you see him making decision after decision after decision that shows he understands, no, you can't. You can't be everything to everyone. And you can't be successful in everything that you're doing, at least not the way that the world thinks about it. And so you look at his life and you see, like, when it comes to the religious leaders of the day, they thought he was a failure. As a matter of fact, they thought he was dangerous. Listen to what it says in Luke chapter 19. It says, after that, he taught daily in the temple, but the leading priests, the teachers of religious law, and the other leaders of the people began planning how to kill him. It's not that they just didn't like him. It's not just that they were disappointed in him. They were pretty set on him going away. Eventually, they pull it off. But they looked at him and said, wait. You're not the religious leader you should be. You should be building into the system that we've built. But it's not just the religious leaders, because we say, well, of course Jesus failed them. They are bad people. You should fail bad people. But it's not just them. Even when you look at the crowds were oftentimes disappointed in Jesus. Listen to what it says in Mark chapter 1. It says, that evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. But the demons knew who he was. But because the demons knew who he was, he did not allow them to speak. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out. And what does it say? So his ministry's growing. There's a huge crowd. It says the whole town is there. It's everything that you would hope as you're building this ministry. And so he gets up the next morning and he goes back out to the crowd, right? He gets up the next morning and continues to heal, right? No, that's not what happens. Listen to what it says. It says, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. So he goes away. He doesn't engage the crowd. He goes away. Listen to what Simon says, what the disciples say when they find him. It says, later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, everyone's looking for you. They said, what are you doing? Everyone's looking for you. Why are you wasting time out here? Get back. Like, we've got things to do. The crowd's growing. This is when we get to grow the ministry. This is everything that we've hoped for. You're becoming famous. Like, why do you keep going away? And they're disappointed. There's another point where the crowd actually leaves because Jesus begins to talk about how he's going to give his life for them, and he does it in a really interesting way. He's talking about, you have to eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, and the crowd's like, whoa, this is weird. And they all leave. And the disciples look at Jesus like, what are you doing? We're supposed to build a crowd, not disperse a crowd. This is not, I don't know if you understand how this works, this ministry thing, but it's better if we bring them in, not get rid of them. And Jesus says to the 12, he says, are you going to leave me too? And Peter doesn't respond and say, no, we absolutely believe you. Peter actually responds and says, we don't really have anywhere else to go. And I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know what this is about, but even in that situation, the disciples themselves are disillusioned by Jesus. And like, what are you doing? And you see it in all these different areas of his life. One of the most powerful ones is Matthew 11. It says, John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about all the things the Messiah was doing, so he sent his disciples to ask Jesus, are you the Messiah we've been expecting, or should we keep looking for someone else? And this is amazing because John the Baptist is the one who announced Jesus to the world. He's the one who baptized Jesus. But John gets thrown in prison, and Jesus doesn't rescue him, and John is disappointed. And so as he sits in prison, he sends word and says, I don't think you're doing what you're supposed to be doing because I'm still in prison. Are you sure you're the Messiah? Even John is disappointed. His family's frustrated by him. Matthew chapter 12, it says, as Jesus was speaking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside asking to speak to him. Someone told Jesus, your mother and your brothers are outside and they want to speak to you. So they show up, and it's his mom. It's not just his brothers. His brothers, but this is his mom. His mom shows up and is like, hey, I should have special access. How about you bring him out here? Bring him out here. And it says, Jesus asked, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Then he pointed to his disciples and said, look, these are my mother and brothers. Anyone who does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. I'm sure his mom loved that. But even they're disappointed. And it's interesting because if anyone should have been able to be everything to everyone, it would have been him. But as God engages the story, he doesn't live outside of our limits. He lives within them. As God becomes flesh, he doesn't live outside of our limits. He lives within them. And one of the hardest things for us to embrace is the reality that we're limited. I need you to turn to the person next to you and say, I am limited. Some of you are like, I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to say it. It's not true. You don't know me. I am limited. And God doesn't escape that. He lives within it. And then he does something really powerful. Because as I said, in all these situations, these individuals, they all felt like Jesus had failed them. Now, does he ultimately fail them? Absolutely not. But in these moments, do they think that he's failed them? Absolutely. Judas betrays Jesus. because he feels that Jesus has failed. He's not going to overthrow Rome. In the moment when Jesus is having his greatest victory, in the moment where he is doing for them what they could not possibly imagine as he gives his life on the cross, all the disciples leave. Why? Because he failed, they thought. Was he actually failing? No. But he embraces it inside of our limits. And he teaches us. Okay, no, you can't be everything to everyone. And you're going to have to make a choice about where it is that you're not going to fail. Because there is one that he never failed. And there is something that he consistently does, that he decides, I'm not going to fail in this. You saw it earlier in the passage that we looked at. Again, in Luke chapter 5, you see it. But despite Jesus' instructions, the report of his power spread even further, and vast crowds came to hear him preach and to be healed of their diseases. These crowds are showing up, but he keeps doing this thing that annoys his disciples, because as it continues, it says, but Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. There is one thing that he decided, no, I'm not going to fail this. There is one that he said, I'm always going to make sure that I show up for, and it's his Father. As a matter of fact, oftentimes, those who felt like he was failing them, it was because of the fact that he kept doing this. And I think Jesus lives out this incredible principle that no, you're gonna have to make a choice in life about where it is that you're going to fail or be perceived as a failure. Because you can't do everything, you can't be everything. And where it is that you're going to say, I'm not going to fail at this. And Jesus decides, I'm not going to fail at this. Now, I think this was significant for many different reasons. One, he decides, I'm not going to fail at this. Oftentimes we look at this and say, well, because it's the right thing to do. Because it's the right thing to do. It's so much bigger than that. Jesus didn't show up. He didn't withdraw to be with the Father because it was the right thing to do. There's no way. Jesus withdrew to be with the Father. Why? Because he delighted in him. Because he loved the Father. So he says, no, I'm not going to fail at that. No matter what. And not only was he able to consistently experience the Father because of that, but he also, and you see Jesus explaining this to disciples about how he engages life. John chapter 5, it says, so Jesus explained, I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He does only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son also does. He says, listen, I just do what I'm told to do. Whatever I see the Father doing, whatever the Father tells me he's doing, that's what it is that I do. And I love how he starts it, because he says, I can do nothing by myself, which he's told us about ourselves too. He says, you can do nothing without me. He says that to his disciples. He said, but here's what I want for you to do. I want for you to abide in me. In other words, I want for you to consistently come away with me. I want you to decide that what it is that I'm not going to fail at is I'm not going to fail at abiding in him and being with him, listening to him. Why? Because he is the delight of my heart, and he also instructs me on where else I should succeed and fail. Because that's hard in life, isn't it? And you see him so powerfully live this out. And I walk us through that because if we're going to learn what it is to delight in him, that's only going to be possible if we decide that we are not going to fail at being with him. That we are not going to fail at abiding in him. And this, going back to that same principle, this is not something that you can just add to. You cannot, don't go down the road of joys found in abundance. I'm just going to get busier. I'm just going to add more to it. This is just another thing that I'm chasing. No. You have to decide. And when you decide, because you can't be successful at everything. You can't be everything. And so when you add something, you're going to have to give something up. What is it that you're going to say, okay, I'm no longer, it's not that you're not going to be good at something, you're not going to try it. It's amazing how when you follow God in something, he multiplies your efforts in something else, and he makes you better at different things. And he works through this so powerfully, just as he did with Jesus. But to say, no, I realize that it might mean that I might not be able to do what I was able to do in those things before, but I am not going to fail in this. And this is going to take faith for some of you because of the fact that you haven't experienced God where you delight in him yet. But that can't happen until you're actually spending time with him, where you're consistently getting away with him. And so you have to decide, now this, I'm not going to fail at this. And it's an act of faith because you don't feel it yet. But you have to trust him that you can experience that in him. And so as you make that your priority, then we can begin to build on that as we move through the next few weeks. But it starts here. Even for some of you who you know what it is to delight in the Lord, you know this is the thing that keeps you from it the most. I know that I can delight in the Lord. I know that I can experience that in him. One of my greatest sins is the sin of busyness. And you move past it. Or even if you experience, you hurry through it. And so you don't enjoy him. Here's your homework for this week. Some of you thinking, homework? Your friend invited you, you're like, I don't do homework. Here's your homework for this week. I want you to lay out your schedule, and I want you to be honest about something in your life. What is it that you have decided you will not fail at? And all of us have them. There are things in your life that you have decided, I will not fail at this. Some of you, it's the gym. You do not fail at going to the gym. It doesn't matter. Everything could go wrong in your life. It's 11:30 at night. You're going to the gym. Doesn't matter. That you are not going to fail at that. For some of you, you are not going to fail when it comes to success. You're going to move up that corporate ladder. It doesn't matter what it takes or what it costs. You've decided, I'm not going to fail at this. What is it for you? Honestly answer the question. What is it for you? And then the second question is this. What would need to change in your schedule for you to ensure that you don't fail at this? That you don't fail at abiding in him, that you don't fail at spending time with him. As you look at that story of Mary and Martha, that you don't fail at sitting at his feet, choosing the good portion. What would need to change? What if the greatest desire of your heart is not something that's distant from you? It's not something you have to work for, that you have to hope for, that one day you might find. What if it's available? Always. What if you could find it at any point in any time? There are people in Scripture that we see this in their life. I think there's a reason why Paul was able to sing in prison. You know why? Because the greatest delight of Paul's life was just as available to him in prison as it was outside. The greatest delight of his life was not freedom. It was the Father. And nobody could take that from him. And they can't take it from you either. The question is, have you learned how to delight in him? And will we decide? Will we decide, now this is where I do not fail? Will you pray with me? Father, as we move through this, I thank you for the example of Jesus and how he demonstrates. No, you can't be everything to everyone. You can't have it all. You intentionally come and you came and lived within our limits to demonstrate what that looks like and to again be the example of how to navigate that. What it is that we should choose, the thing that we don't fail at, and then how that impacts the rest of that journey. And Father, I just pray that we would continue following you in this to discover, okay, how do I delight in him? In Jesus' name.